Welcome to Forward with Truth. It's great to have you with us. I'm just here with my good friend Sammy Heenan. Sammy is no stranger to TV. He's no stranger to radio, and he's now on a podcast. So we just wanted to say thank you so much, Sammy, for coming. Sammy has a powerful and deeply moving story. He's a man whose story is etched in the history of Northern Ireland, but more than that, it's a spiritual struggle between darkness and light. Sammy Heenan was just 12 years old when his father, William Henan, was murdered by the Provisional IRA in 1985, and that's the 40th anniversary. It's just passed a couple of weeks ago. Orphaned by violence, raised in grief, Sammy could have been consumed by hatred, but instead he's found faith, he's found truth, and he's found a voice. Sammy now speaks out as an advocate for victims' rights against the glorification of terrorism and in favour of true reconciliation grounded in biblical truth. Sammy, welcome to the Forward with Truth podcast.
Thank you very much, Nathan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Indeed, and it's good to have a wee bit of sunshine finally.
Lovely, glorious. Yeah, glorious.
Although it keeps you guys busy, doesn't it?
It does indeed. Yes, yes.
Sammy, before we get into the harder parts, could you share us a fond memory from your early childhood?
Yeah, growing up in a very rural setting of Leganonny, it was a very tranquil setting, a very peaceful setting. And I suppose the happiest memory that I have growing up as a child was when I was able to join Leganonny Accordion Band.
All right.
As you can appreciate, culture is a big part of our community, and my father was a member of Leganonny Accordion Band. And we used to go off to the Orange Hall to band practice. I was never allowed to go. I was always told that children were not, no, it was not for children. You only went there when you could play an instrument. And then after my mother's death, I think maybe then he thought, right, this is the time. I was 9 years old and learned to play the drum. And in those days, they just didn't go out and buy a drum. They got a wee drum, I think they cut it down, and it was the 11th night. It was touch and go whether this drum would be ready for the 12th or not. And you can appreciate the excitement I had, but the nervousness is the drum going to be ready. And but the drum was about 10 or half 10 that night. The drum was ready, and I had my wee blue jumper, my wee red tie and white shirt and black trousers and my wee hat. And I tell you, I went to bed that night and I never slept with excitement. The thought of getting up the next morning to pray with my daddy in Leganonny Accordion Band the 12th of July, and that's probably one of the happiest and fondest memories I have of a child with my father.
And playing the drum? Playing
the side drum in the band for many years, and then obviously I was promoted to the bass drum. The pay didn't seem to go up that much, but it's a good instrument too. So yes, and obviously the band's doing very well at the moment, especially in such a rural area. Yeah, a lot of young people coming through, and young people very proud and confident of their culture. Good. Yeah. And
Leganonny is a beautiful part of the world, and a very historic part of the world, so it is.
It is. Leganonny is renowned for the famous Leganonny Dolmen. Yeah. It's about a quarter of a mile up from the Orange Hall. And obviously then at the top of Leganonny there's the Sleeve Crib Mountain, which is very scenic.
That's right.
Vantage point for many people that come from all over Northern Ireland and further afield just to do the lovely walk up to the top of the mountain. It's beautiful scenery.
And nearby there's the Finnassuder Inn as well. You know,
that's correct.
So there's a lot of history to the place, stretching back thousands of years.
That's correct.
So we're I suppose, but then let's go into your family history. Tell us a bit about your parents, your home. What kind of father was William Henan?
My father was a fantastic father. Obviously, it was when I grew up with my father, a lady who I thought was my mother. And one morning on the 11th of December 1981, I got up that morning. My daddy was away to work, I was off school. As a result of a bad cold, there was a heavy snowfall. And I encountered this woman who thought it was my mother being violently sick. And several times that day she asked me the question, would I miss her if anything ever happened to her? So I gave the usual answers a 9-year-old child would. I paid no more attention to the question, but I thought that I was worried inside because I'd never seen this woman sick before. Yeah. We both sat down at 4 o'clock, the Doric stove was blazing up the chimney waiting for my father to come home. Sitting watching TV, and she was beside me and I heard a wee groan. On her head slumped forward, and she died in the chair sitting beside me. So I got up, started to cry, sobbed, didn't know what to do with no phone. I ran out of the house, I tried to run down the hill, but I was just getting bogged down in the snow. My wee legs were I wasn't going nowhere. I was sliding and falling where the compacted snow was, and I just got up and I stood on that hill outside and cried and sobbed, just so scared. Eventually, neighbours came up the road in their Land Rover. I found me in a very distressed and shivering state. Took me in, comforted me, warmed me up, stayed with me until my father came home. My father came home, and I can remember the neighbours leaving, and there was only the three of us in the room. And I remember my daddy getting down one knee and he says, "Sammy, I have something to tell you." He says, "This woman that you thought was your mother is not your mother, she's your grandmother." So there's a lot to take in that short space of time. I always knew that someone's dead and add up, because this woman was 75, my daddy's 49, and I was 9 years old. But that's what I was told, that's what I was led to believe. That was a pretense that was kept up in the community. So I never questioned it, except one time I did come home and ask the question, because some of the children at school had said to me, "Why do you call her your mummy, which is actually your grandmother?" Children were very truthful, they weren't saying it with any malice. So my father then proceeded to tell me at that point that my real mother was still living, and she only lived about 6 or 7 miles from our home, and she'd now be coming home to live with us. I also found out I had a grandmother and an uncle on my mother's side, and so I knew it was a lot. I tell you, Nathan, it was a lot to take in that short day. Yeah. But it was as if it was a burden lifted from my father when he was able to tell me. So my mother, as I say, came into our life, and the first day I met my mummy was the day of my grandmother's funeral. And yet again, the snow was coming, my grandmother was buried, and we had to make our way home very quickly. And this woman got into the car with a wee bag to come home and live with us. And that was my mother. And that was the first I set eyes on her. So it was very surreal that night, sitting around the fire, the lights were out, the power was out, and it was a lot to take in. So I was very nervous after that. Very, very nervous as a child, because of the trauma I encountered with my grandma and this new woman into my life. But my mummy said she was going to make up for lost time. It was a new start, new beginning. But at this point, Nathan, I was consumed with fear and anxiety, and I kept things very much to myself. I never told no one. That's the type of child I was. But I was so consumed with fear that something bad was going to happen to us now. If I had felt sick or ill, I thought, am I going to die? Or if my daddy complained of feeling unwell, and my mummy complained of feeling unwell, I thought, are they going to die? So, but I kept up, as I say, them feelings very much to myself, and my mummy and I was getting on so well. And but I was still consumed with fear. Couldn't enjoy the relationship because of these fears. And unfortunately then my worst fears were realised. On Easter Monday, my daddy was praying and refrain with the apprentice boys. My mum complained of feeling unwell, and as the week progressed, her condition seemed to deteriorate. I was still only 9 years old, only known her for 4 months, and she went to the doctor on a Thursday night, and we come back home, and I think she was told, go back home tonight, see how you feel in the morning, maybe go into hospital. So we went to bed, one bedroom cottage, as I say, and I remember I couldn't sleep. I just kept watching over. My daddy had fallen asleep, and I just kept watching, and I noticed she lifted a wee torch as if she was going to be sick, a wee basin, and the torch fell out of her hand, reflecting up into her face. So I could see her face in the darkened room, and she was like a stare. But I thought, is this my imagination again? Am I being, over paranoid or whatever? And but eventually plucked the courage up to say to my daddy, please wake up. I think there's something wrong with my mummy. So my daddy woke up and he says, Sammy, would you stay with your mummy? Because I think I had to go for help. Your mummy's not well, but still had no phone. I started sobbing and crying, Nathan, because I couldn't stay on my own. I couldn't do it. I was so scared. My mummy laying dying in the bed. So I got my bicycle out of the barn. We grabbed our bicycle, and I had no lights in the bed. I wasn't equipped for the journey. It was a half-mile journey, but I set off that night in the bicycle, and I knew I had to get help, and I knew how to get quickly. And I eventually made the neighbour's house, and I honestly don't know how I got there. It was such a dark night, and the alarm was raised. The ambulance came, took my mum to hospital, and I can remember sitting out in Elvis' car later on that night, and this wee nurse coming out through the doors of the hospital, and I remember watching her coming through the doors, and I lay back down the back seat of her Elvis' car, and she come to the window. I don't think she didn't realise I was in the back seat, and she says to the man in the car, the relative in the car, says, I'm sorry to inform you, she says, Mrs. Heenan has just died. My mum died of a brain hemorrhage. She's only 43 years old, and I'd only known her for 4 months of my life. So the chapter that my mum and dad had finally got together, the new beginning, it was evaporated so quickly. And I suppose how that situation evolved, I think from my mum and dad got together as a couple, the two grannies on either side didn't approve of the relationship. My daddy tried to bring my mum home to 1-bedroom cottage, and it didn't work out. My mum had postnatal depression. My mummy took me home then after several disputes. My daddy came down, found me in a distressed state, and brought me home. And my grandmother reared me as her own. So I have many questions how that situation was permitted to evolve, but it did.
And in those days,
yeah,
like in those days, let's face it, Sammy, they weren't talked about in rural. It was just, that's what happened. We sort of moved.
That was the official line. Everybody embraced that and seemed to buy into that. And but you know, I have many questions. Obviously, you know, if my mum had died first, I would never know, would I ever known her, you know. But it was as if there was a burden lifted when my granny was sitting there. And my granny was so good to me. She reared me, and so I suppose back to the question again. My daddy, he stepped up to the level that was required, Nathan, to raise me as his only child. He still had to continue on as his role as a digger driver in the DOE, but he had to come home. He cooked, he cleaned, chores, to be honest, that the ladies would have previously have done.
Yeah.
But we had a fantastic relationship where he went, I went. If he went out at night, I just went with him. There's times I went.
We shadow.
And you know what? I had to grow up very quickly in the summertime. He went off to work, school holidays. I had to stay there on my own at 9 years old, but that was okay. I could do that because I had matured very, very quickly. And although the troubles were raging at that time, there wasn't the same criminality about, or it didn't appear to be anyway. And I actually felt very safe. But I suppose my abiding memory of childhood was one of loneliness and isolation because I was an only child living in the country. And but yeah, and that's why the band was a big part of my life. When he went out in the band, I was in the band with him. So we had a fantastic time. He was a great man. Everybody you speak to now had a fantastic word of my father. He was very strong on what he was in terms of his patriotism, his culture, his identity, his politics. But he's a good neighbour and friend to everyone, both sides of the community. And I suppose up in such a rural area there was, the troubles were, and we were very, very aware of the troubles. But day-to-day neighbourliness was there. People were kind, you know, and so it was what rural life was like in Northern Ireland at that particular time.
That is true, and I have family members who lived in the city, family members who live in the country, and there was a good accord between both sides in the countryside, because and the reality is, and you could have in one street or one road, you know, 3 or 4 people, and they were both sides of the community.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and they all live one beside another.
Yeah.
So your father was a kind man, a good man, and not just to you, but to the wider community. Yeah. On that night in 1985, I know this is very tough, but can you take us back and explain what happened that night, or that day?
That morning, actually. Yeah, it was like a lead up like any other. The weather was good. We had been out, my daddy and I had been out on the Thursday night, and we only had the phone installed. You talk to the young people now, but that's the phone, you dial it and you had to wait and the numbers coming back. And I remember taking the first phone call that night about 9:30, and so excited to hear the phone ringing in our house. Like, it was so simplistic. And the phone call, and Daddy and I went to bed, and woke up the next morning. I remember the sun beating through the window, and my daddy getting up first. Funny thing was, the previous 4 mornings that week, I got up first and I went out to feed the small number of hens we had. We were only 6 hens for eggs. So, but he went out that morning first, and he says, "You lie on, I'm going out to feed the hens." I said, "That's okay." I drifted back to sleep. I was 12 years old at this stage. I just started Castlewell High School. My confidence had come back again because I'd met new friends, and the new primary school which we attended was 14 pupils in the entire school. I went to Castlewell High, 230. So getting my confidence back, life was starting to get good again, you know, when I look back now. So my daddy went out, and I had fallen back asleep, and I was awakened by what I can only describe as a painful, piercing yell and a gunshot. So I woke up and trying to make sense of what I'd heard. And I initially thought he was out shooting crows for some reason. But I looked across in the corner of the room and his legally held shotgun and his .22 rifle were stacked like up against the wall. So I quickly discounted that theory. And so I got out of bed and crawled across the bed to the bedroom window, and I rubbed the morning dew, a single glazed window. At that time in the morning there's a morning dew on the inside of the window. Rubbed that away, and I just sat with my chin in my hands. I heard my father's car start up after a period of time, and I listened intently as the car seemed to reverse around the front of the house, and just it came into my sight as I was looking out. It was an Austin Allegro, and it was reversing around the front of the house. So I looked in the car, and there was a strange man reversing away in my daddy's car. Man I didn't know. He had a wee hat on, a wee tea-cozy cap, he had a duffel coat. As I was looking at him, I thought he was looking at me, but he actually wasn't. He was navigating his way around the side of the house, reversing around the side of the house. So the car took off at speed, down our hill, across another road, and I watched that car until it went out of sight. And at that stage, Nathan, I could feel a real sickness, fear, and unease coming over me. I knew there was something badly wrong here. So I put on my clothes, I went out to the front door, I shouted for my daddy over and over again, hoping he'd come round the corner and give me some explanation to what I'd heard. I ran up into the wee tap street and noticed the wee jug that he had fed the hens with, just a wee jug, wee bucket of meal, laying smashed. And I noticed he put a blood around it, around the jug. So I followed the trail of blood, what I thought, round the side of the barn. And there laying on the ground that morning was an image Nathan and I will never ever forget. It was the image of my little daddy laying dead in the street. And I burst into tears. I started to sob and I cried and I didn't know what to do. I was starting over him. Initially I tried to get the keys. I thought I tried to get the barn door open to get the bicycle out, to do the same manoeuvre again, get the bicycle down the road. But the funny thing was I forgot we had a phone. I just forgot about the phone. And all I could think about doing was running to the neighbour's house half a mile away again to get help. And I remember running down that road and crying and hoping someone would come to my aid, hoping a car would come. But there's such a rural part of Northern Ireland, cars at that time in the morning, you know, there wasn't that many on the road. And I ran up another hill, and I remember my asthma started to play up and the shock. And by the time I got to the neighbour's house, it was just a real mess. And the neighbour people brought me in, comforted me, phoned emergency services. I think I phoned a couple of my relatives that had left, and in the panic then we all ran back up to the house again. And when we got back up to the house, it was nothing we could do. My daddy was laying dead in the street. The neighbour's young son tried to resuscitate, but there was nothing could be done. My father had been murdered that morning, and as I say again, his death was instantaneous.
So how did you, as a 12-year-old boy who's lost his granny, his mum, how did you cope?
Well, after that happened, there was a lot of commotion that morning. The neighbours started to arrive, the police started to arrive, and I knew at the start I didn't know who shot my daddy. I didn't even think of terrorism. I think at the start, till the police took me in, and my minister came, the Reverend Robert Jones, who was a tremendous source of pastoral support to me, and he sorted out all the press. But I knew that I had witnessed this gunman. The police knew I had witnessed this gunman, so the police produced all these books of Republican activists to see that I had really identified them, and I couldn't identify them. I had to then start in the process of doing a photo fit. And the photo fit, it wasn't like probably the technology it is today. You had a set of eyes, ears, you had to build that all together and try to formulate this picture. It was difficult. So yeah, it was a very difficult day, a very challenging day. But the police were so good. I remember them taking me away to take distraction, take my mind off it. But I still had to go back, do statements, and there was so much focus at that time. People were coming up, and obviously my father's murder generated a lot of outrage at that particular time. In particular, all the news bulletins, this wee boy run down the road that morning, having lost his mum and gran 3 years previous. And the Reverend Jones, as a minister, handled the press so well, and it was a lot for him. He's only a 29-year-old minister from Southern Ireland up into Northern Ireland. He already witnessed the murder of John Bell in Rathfriland several weeks before that, and then obviously got the call that morning about my father. So he handled matters so well. So yeah, it was a very, very busy time. My daddy's funeral then was on the Sunday, and I don't think I realised, at the same time, you're only 12 years old, you're oblivious to a whole lot of what was going on too. And I remember coming around down the road and the police saluting the coffin. I'd never seen that before. And then I remember coming around towards the church and couldn't believe the crowd of people that was outside the church. So I always, even though I was 12 years old, I had a lot of growing up to do in a short space of time. And then I had to make a decision where I was going to live, because my daddy was the only child. My daddy had cousins. Unfortunately, after my mummy's death, my grandmother and uncle on that particular side stopped speaking again to my daddy and I. So really, I had to pick whether I was going to go live in Dromara, cousins, or Castlewellan. So I opted for Castlewellan, relatives from Castlewellan, because I was attending Castlewellan High School. I made many friends there, and I sort of wanted that, continuity in my life, and so I opted for Castlewellan. But very aware of the community focus that was on me at that particular time. So, and I can remember funny wee things you do remember, that praying on the 12th, first 12th after my daddy's murder, and coming around the corner of the drum and people applauding. I never thought of it. I thought they were applauding the band, but then I found out years later it was just that people demonstrating appreciation that the wee boy was still praying, and so that was and it's only when you look back at the significance of that, and how appreciative I was of that, so it was a lot to take in.
Yeah. And for a 12-year-old to be orphaned in such traumatic circumstances, and you needed that community around you, didn't you?
Yeah.
Because I just don't think somebody at that age could have went a very dark way, couldn't you? So how did you avoid going down that dark path that many went, and how did you not become consumed by bitterness?
Well, as I say, people were so good. There was a trust fund set up, and the people collected money in the trust fund, and so I was aware of the grief that was felt by people in the community, the revulsion. I remember receiving a bike, a lovely wee BMX bike, from a Roman Catholic family in Dublin. Because they had heard the story and they thought that the spare bike, and they thought they wanted to help. So it was by no means a Protestant thing. There were people across both sides of the community were absolutely horrified. A terrorist organisation walked into a home and murdered an innocent man. People can turn around and say that they went down this path or that path because of their past. But I always said nothing justified the taking of innocent life in Northern Ireland. And I suppose I had as much justification as anyone to go out and lift a gun, but I couldn't have went out and murdered my neighbour, because how would that have helped the situation in Northern Ireland? I couldn't have done it. I wasn't brought up that way. I wasn't a killer. I hadn't the capabilities of being a killer. So I couldn't have done that. But I have to say I was a very angry wee boy, because I witnessed my daddy being murdered. But I channeled all my energies into my culture, my identity. I want to be part of the band. And then the next milestone was for me, I couldn't wait till I was 16, 17 to join the Orange Institution and follow in the footsteps of my father. And I was a very unionist wee boy. I was, I loved reading about politics. So, I channeled my energies into things in a positive manner, as I thought, being aware of the community focus. And if I had went down the road of revenge or retribution, that was giving justification for the people also who murdered my father. And I suppose the community focus did keep me in many ways on track. And I really did. And looking back now, I appreciated everything people had done for me at that time.
So would you have said as well that one of the things that was helpful was the band, the Orange Order, which and the sort of legitimate political ways to express your identity, but also express the revulsion?
Yes.
and be constructive about that.
Yeah, and it saddens me today, when I hear people, there is a move on mentality out there in sections of the Protestant community.
Yeah.
You must move on, son, must move on. And I can move on, and I could move on. But the problem is, in 2025, there's a revisionism of history taking place, a glorification of terrorism. We have a new generation of young people growing up actually thinking the IRA were freedom fighters, patriots, revolutionaries. And that saddens me, because what they're glorifying is psychopathic Republican murderers. And I don't think that's the same within the Unionist community, because obviously outside Belfast, there was not support in rural areas for violence, against the nationalist community. So, and I watch this, and it actually frustrates me, because young people need to be moving forward together. But I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing one particular grouping being radicalised into the romanticisation of the provisional IRA.
Well, maybe on that point, so the IRA obviously claimed itself to be a legitimate army, right? And it was fighting a moral war against imperialism.
And oppression.
Oppression.
All the buzzwords.
All the buzzwords, okay. But the IRA claimed your father was involved in the security forces, and therefore that obviously meant that it was okay for them to kill him off at his home, which by the way is a war crime, but anyway, neither here nor there. But you have strongly refuted that. So how do you respond to that allegation?
Well, what Republicans are latching onto now to justify my father's murder and condone it was the fact that he was a member of the Ulster Special Constabulary some 15 years previous.
Yeah.
My father was not a member of the RUC Reserve like they claimed. Some people alluded to the theory it was mistaken identity, but it wasn't, because you don't make mistakes in the middle of the country.
No.
And
it would have, and this is one of the sad realities, in that it would have had to have been somebody that knew your dad
exactly.
and set him up.
And I had my father's car registration number, and the Southdown IRA could quite easily have stated it was mistaken identity, but they didn't.
Yeah.
It took them 6 days to claim it, mind you, and but they still claimed it, put out the justification that my father was a member of the RUC Reserve. But there was many anomalies in my father's murder that you maybe wouldn't find the prototypes in other murders, because terrorists never leave their getaway to chance. And that particular morning, the gunman was dropped off at our home. He hid in an old outbuilding, and somehow or other he found the car keys to my father's car. His accomplice dropped them off, drove on to them Kira Forest Park, waited for the gunman to arrive in my daddy's car, but that gunman was standing alone in isolation in the country. So how was he so sure of finding my father's car keys that morning to make this escape? Because there were no mobile phones in those days, so he couldn't turn around and ring somebody and say, or something happened, say the gun had a jam. They're saying my daddy had overpowered him. So that was a wee mystery to me to this day. Only one gunman involved. The weapon that was used to murder my father was an old Webley revolver. Never been used since, or was ever used in the past. One murder that gun was used for. The bullets that were used were actually homemade from an old shotgun cartridge, improvised to suit the gun, because there was no modern ammunition for that particular type of weapon. So
very unprofessional.
Very what? Yes.
I don't like saying it, but
crude. But then it was an up close and personal killing.
Yeah.
And I spoke to different people in the intelligence service. It was up close and personal. A lot of provos were cowards, and most provos were cowards, but some of them didn't like the fact that they had to kill somebody directly. Maybe it's okay planting a bomb because you're away. Maybe if you're on a hillside, you're triggering a bomb, but to walk up behind somebody and shoot them took somebody just particularly depraved. So why were they using a weapon and ammunition that could have malfunctioned? So that was a wee mystery as well. But it was particularly depraved and particularly cruel, because my daddy came out that morning and he had a habit of looking out over the countryside, because we had a beautiful view of the Mourne Mountains, just the whole view of the Mourne Mountains in front of the home. The gunman walked up behind my daddy and he forced him to his knees and he shot him twice in the top of the head at point blank range.
So it was an execution?
It was an execution. And how I know he was on his knees was because the trajectory of the bullets, one bullet was retrieved from my father's abdomen, and one bullet was retrieved from the temple of his head. And then he was dragged like an animal by the feet to drag the body round the side of the barn, and maybe in the hope and expectation I wouldn't have come out for a wee while. But they found the car keys. My daddy could have had his car keys in the house. That gunman had to come into the house to look for the keys. He could have had them in a drawer, he could have had them in another trouser pocket. Mm-hmm. Or did he get the keys off my daddy before he murdered him? I don't know. There are questions that still remain.
That's strangeness as well. Like, how can the IRA justify that as a legitimate target, mm-hmm. or as a legitimate killing?
Yeah.
Because ultimately he was retired. He was feeding his chickens, mm-hmm. and they executed him.
Yeah.
So, what does it say about moral accountability that they needed to lie and twist that who your father was and the identity to justify a killing?
I have challenged Sinn Féin repeatedly, mm-hmm. over the years. And Sinn Féin have so much to say about every other act of injustice that they perceive. Mm-hmm. They're all over everything in terms of the nationalist community.
Yeah.
But when I challenge them in the murder of William Henan, they've nothing to say. They're conveniently nothing to say. I've challenged Chris Hazard, the MP for Southdown, repeatedly, mm-hmm. To condemn my father's murder, and he refuses to do so. So I would render him a hypocrite, because if he's standing up for the rights of nationalists and those people, mm-hmm. that were murdered, but yet he can obviously, what's his view on the murder of William Henan? But he won't, mm-hmm. express that, because but it's the hypocrisy of Republicans in Southdown, because only a few weeks back they were standing paying homage to IRA volunteers at the IRA death shrine in Castlewellan. Mm-hmm. So obviously, when you talk about the volunteers, you're talking about the same calibre of individual who came into my home, yeah. on the 3rd of May 1985 and executed my father. And society seems to be so conditioned to that normality that, mm-hmm. it doesn't even turn an eye to it now, as if, yeah. it's the most normal thing in the world. But in Lower Square, Castlewellan, there's an IRA memorial to the murders to over 80 people in Southdown. There's also one in Kilcoo. There's also one in Downpatrick. So like the IRA were a ruthless terrorist organisation. There was no honour, no code. They had psychotic tendencies, and how could they have anything else to walk in and murder a defenceless 51-year-old Protestant man, knowing that his son was going to come out and find his body, knowing that the wee boy, me, I had experienced the loss of my mother 3 years before that, and my grandmother as well. So,
and he was your world.
He was my world. So there was child abuse in there as well, because, mm-hmm. they did not care about my feelings. They still do not care about my feelings, because I suppose over the years I have become more vocal, because I think it is imperative that we protect the memory and the integrity of the innocent going forward in these, mm-hmm. days of revisionism. And I sustain unbelievable abuse in relation to the murder of my father. Things like, I have a phone full of them. Do you still hear the shots, Sammy?
Is this what they said?
This is what they say to me all over social media. I even get messages, last weekend, or a couple of weekends ago, after my father's anniversary service. Your daddy was nothing a sectarian tool and a useless piece of shite. And it's just, there's so much abuse going on out there. He got his comeuppance. Some of it couldn't even repeat. It's that vile. But because I'm a victim, you just have to suck it up. Yeah. What am I going to do with this? Republicans want innocent victims they want to drive them off social media. They want their narrative to go away. They want to control the narrative of the past. But I can assure you, Sammy Heenan is not going to let that happen. Yeah. Because when you see your daddy laying dead in the street, it's ingrained in your mind that you have to stand up for the rights of the innocent people of Northern Ireland. And but that's what they want to do. Ultimately, it's driving people away. And but thankfully, I have a tough exterior in that it doesn't faze me, because I don't respect them. I don't so I don't worry what to say. And I will keep championing the cause of the innocent victim.
I think the difference, the problem that they have as well, is that with regards to you, you're someone who unlike them is consistent. because you're somebody who has said you disagree with all murder.
Yeah.
You know, you just not just you're not saying I agree with those murders and don't agree with those ones. You've been consistent. Whereas what they want to say is all state atrocities or murders, as it were, that those were really bad. All things purveyed by loyalists were really bad, but everything that we did was justified.
Correct.
And the thing is too with the IRA, and this is something for the American audience too, what people don't realise is the IRA was the biggest aggressor.
Yeah.
Numerically, killed more people than any other organisation in the entire Troubles. And not just that, it killed more Catholics.
Over 350 Catholics out of 1,800 victims, 350 were from the Roman Catholic community.
That's right. And
some of the most depraved deaths as well. We think of Patsy Gillespie tied to a vehicle.
Yeah.
And had to drive into an army checkpoint. Just all because the man was picked because he happened to be work in an army base. Yeah. That's how depraved these people actually were. Yeah. He was deemed as a collaborator, so they were going to teach him a lesson, which is going to be a lesson to the rest of the national community. So, and obviously 60%, the statistic, 60% of all people murdered in the Troubles were murdered by the provisional IRA.
Yeah.
But when we look at legacy now, and we look at the TV screens tonight, you wouldn't think that.
Yeah.
You honestly think that the majority of killings in Northern Ireland were attributable to the British Army, even though the British Army was responsible for 10%. How did that 10%? Many of those were in public order situations. Obviously, there was a lot of
self-defence.
A lot of young people killed stray bullets because, but at the end of the day, you had to ask the question: who was engaged in the army in the first place? It was the provisional IRA in nationalist districts. So stray bullets happened, regrettably, and the terrorists brought the army onto the streets. As soon as the peace process happened, the army were confined to barracks, and next thing, they called the peace. So it was within the terrorists. If the terrorists had declared ceasefires 20 years before that, a lot of lives would have been saved.
And I think the thing is, too, we don't have a problem in saying if any murder was done by the state forces, that needs to be called out.
Yeah,
there's no problem in that because ultimately murder's murder.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who was murdered. But I suppose, why must society confront these false justifications? When we consider, for instance, your dad, a civilian, executed a war crime, and other ones that we could think of, Catholics and Protestants, purveyed by the IRA. Why must society confront these false justifications?
You see, we're now, 20 some odd years past the signing of the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah.
Okay. Society should be further down the road of reconciliation and peace. But we're not.
Yeah.
Because the issues which blighted us all those years ago are still coming to the fore to this day. Now, I could move forward, a lot more easily if this consistent rewriting of terrorism wasn't taking place. Sinn Féin are now the largest political party in Northern Ireland, which I think is a sad indictment upon our society, but that's democracy. We have to accept that, okay? Yeah. And but this is the party of government. We were told by the First Minister of Northern Ireland that there was no alternative. So it's sad, it's a challenge, but it's important that the next generation grows up knowing that the peace that we have today was brought about by the resilience of this society. Yeah. And within the resilience of that society, I'm talking about members of the security forces who paid a heavy price to preserve peace in Northern Ireland. And that's what they did. They done that. And but young people have to know that. And instead of all this, it's witch hunts against the RUC, the witch hunt against the UDR, British Army, Prison Service, B Specials. We could go right back to the formation of Northern Ireland. Everybody was the villain. But the provisional IRA are portraying themselves as the peacemakers. And I was on a radio show the other morning, and I listened to Sinn Féin representatives coming on talking about Bobby Sands. And I honestly was on the phone, and one of the few times I wish I could have challenged this particular Sinn Féin former MP. You would have talked Bobby Sands, you'd have thought he was some sort of saint. who delivered the peace process, or was a forerunner to fighting oppression and justice. Bobby Sands was a furniture bomber, hardly the mate of British imperialism in Northern Ireland. And in turn, when they're glorifying Bobby Sands, they're actually glorifying suicide. And that needs to be called out. So we have to challenge that. And I think society should be doing more challenging. You shouldn't leave it to the victims. I think our churches need to step up. Because I think our churches are very shy at coming forward and representing victims.
Yeah.
Now, we had a service in the parish church where my daddy was buried a few weeks back.
It was conducted by the minister, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And gave me great comfort that day, great assurance, because he called it out, and he was very factual about it. And that's all I want is facts. I don't want any fluffy language. You can't dress up in any other way. Dress it up in any way. Although some people would try it. Some people try to force victims down a road of forgiveness when they're not going down that road because they've never seen any repentance. And sometimes the church places too great an emphasis on victims to forgive rather than on perpetrators to repent. And as a victims group, we went out to Rwanda a number of years back there, and we studied the genocide. What happened. It was terrible. Very emotional hearing first-hand accounts of people, and suffered grievously out there. But there's a stronger emphasis on repentance.
Is there?
Yes,
Yeah.
stronger emphasis on repentance.
So what is
and there was no glorification out there of the genocide. No glorification. No gavel walls to former
Hutus or
Tutsis or there was nothing that. And dare anyone speak about as if this genocide was justified?
So both sides are coming together.
Yes.
Both are repenting, and both are.
Well, obviously, it was primarily the Hutus were the aggressor out there, and the Tutsis, obviously, in most cases, were the victims. And there's obviously Hutus who were deemed collaborators, were part of the victims within the genocide as well. But we went out there, and we could see people. There's initiatives like Cow for Peace, where a cow was presented to the victim as like a charitable act, and then the first calf born from that cow is given to the perpetrator. If the perpetrator repents and we said sorry, and we stood before people and listened to people crying because they were so sorry that they murdered their neighbour. And genuine apologetic for their crimes.
Just while we're exploring that, and maybe just push into this just a wee bit more. Sorry, you say about repentance? Was this Christian biblical repentance? Was it founded on Christ? Was it, or was this come from a Christian?
In Rwanda?
Yeah.
Oh yes, there's the people we heard about, because we were out there. It was a faith-based, initiative to go out there to study that. So
these were Christian
people.
So the church was taking a lead in facilitating repentance of the
perpetrators.
Of the perpetrators.
Yes, and we got, there was a greater emphasis placed on repentance.
Yeah.
But sometimes in Northern Ireland, and I have been challenged a number of times, because when I share my testimony and tell my story, I can't actually forgive the people who murdered my father. I can't forgive them, because I refer to Nathan as like a wee scab on my arm. It's cut. The scab heals over. It's never going to truly heal. Because every time you glorify an act of terrorism, every time you're standing at an IRA death shrine, you're picking at that scab, and it's still the wound still keeps opening. So, and I have never heard Republicans say they're sorry. There's been no apologies. Instead, I just noticed continued antagonism, glorification. And how is society supposed to heal and move on that basis when there's people still justifying the murder of our loved ones? And I think the church leaderships, not so much on the ground, a lot of good people on the ground, still providing pastoral support, and comfort to victims. But the hierarchy needs to be much more vocal and to call it out.
Do you know what I would say, Sammy? And I hope you don't mind me saying, I think you can forgive. I just don't think reconciliation can happen.
Yes, and forgiveness is very much
letting go.
It's a personal matter, right? It's a personal matter.
Right.
Some people can forgive. I personally can't.
Yeah.
Does that make me a bad as a Christian man? No, it doesn't. Because I'm being honest. If you understand what I mean, I'm being honest. And but reconciliation, yes, there's two different dynamics going on there. But I feel as a Christian man, and And I am a very forgiving person by nature. I wouldn't be one for harbouring grudges. You know, if somebody wrongs me, I always look for the way of, you know, whatever, trying to get back, and you know. But on that particular fundamental issue, I'm sorry, I cannot forgive the people who murdered my father. If the people who murdered my father said they were sorry, that starts to put the ball back into my court. And as a Christian man, if they trusted Christ as their saviour, well, then the onus is on me to forgive, because Christ has forgiven them, because they have repented at the foot of the cross. They've confessed their sins, and you know, He's faithful and just, you know, to forgive their sins. And but I struggle, because I see nothing coming from the Republican movement, and it's them should be coming to say sorry.
Yeah.
But and equally as applicable if you're a Roman Catholic and somebody murdered your loved one, you know. So
From a loyalist.
From a loyalist, yes.
Perspective.
Yeah.
Well, amid such trauma and grief and all of the stuff that's been going on that we've talked about, how did you come to faith in Christ?
Well, back to the point again, all I wanted to do was follow my father's footsteps and join the Orange Order, for to, you know, exercise my culture, my identity, my belief system. So I joined the Orange and started to attend Orange services.
Sure.
Okay, which is a tradition in rural Northern Ireland. Every Sunday there's maybe a service to an Orange Hall or church. A pastor, a preacher in Orange Chapel will come in and preach God's word. And looking back, you know, I always knew the gospel message, but I didn't really pay attention to it, if you understand what I mean. And one night at 15, I remember being in a disco and God speaking to me that night. Okay, I'm not a sensationalist person. When I say speaking to me, I couldn't get the things of God out of my mind that night. I just kept thinking about God. I don't know why. I couldn't fathom it.
He was on your tail, as they say.
On my tail. So I went out that night and thought nothing more about it. And then when I was in the Orange Order and joined some of them services, I started to hear the gospel message, starting to penetrate me. And I sort of started asking more questions. And then a wee battle commenced in my life at that time. So no matter where I go, Nathan, one of the proudest things, or wherever I speak, one of the proudest things that I am is an Orange man. Okay. Because little did I realise the spiritual impact that organisation is going to have upon my life. It's a very Christ-centred Christian organisation. It has its faults. We're not saying we're the Orange institution's white and white. There's faults within, the same as any organisation, same as any church. But the spiritual outreach and opportunities of proclaiming the gospel and gospel outreach, when you have men prepared to come to church to hear the gospel, it's a fantastic opportunity. And sadly in Northern Ireland today, there's a lot of churches declining the opportunity to bring Orange men under the church, because there is still, or more so now in Northern Ireland, what I would call an evangelical snobbery. You understand? You know, oh, how does this impact our outreach? We piece of orange cloth, maybe we shouldn't. People in. And thankfully it's still in a minority of churches. But it's a new evangelical, even trendyism.
Aye.
And when you've 80 or 90 maybe men coming to church, a lot of those men are already Christian men, but a lot maybe they're in the organisation for many different reasons. Some join the Orange because it's family, some join because it's historical, faith-based, some like the pageantry of it. You know, there's many different reasons. Some like them all.
Yeah.
I love them all. You know. So it's multifaceted. So and that's, so it saddens me that, because what if there's somebody coming in there and you turn around and say, no, we'd rather you don't come, we don't, as an organisation, the church, that saddens me. It saddens me a lot. But thankfully it's still only a minority of churches in Northern Ireland to this day.
We've had a discussion with Nelson McCausland about this whole dynamic. Well worth looking at it, and encourage the viewers to look at the Nelson McCausland one as well, because some of the issues that you're talking there, it comes up in that discussion. I don't want to repeat, but I think there is this whole approach that is, we can't reach out to Protestant or unionist loyalist culture because that might affect our outreach to Catholics.
Yes.
But I find that very often the churches that say that are in hugely Protestant areas and have no Catholics about them, and they're doing no outreach to Catholics. So I think very often the trope is used as a way to not engage with the culture in which they're in.
Exactly.
Because it's a class issue, largely.
It's a class issue as well, and which is prevalent now, maybe wasn't prevalent 40, 50 years ago. Yeah. You understand? And I think in many ways, the Orange Order, probably over the years have made mistakes. As people evolve, they think, maybe it would have changed, maybe it wouldn't have went down that particular route or took that decision or whatever it is, but at the end of the day, it's a fantastic organisation. It was a stabilising influence in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. It was a calming influence amongst young people to give young people an outlet, like myself. So I'm fiercely protective of its history, and I'm very proud as an Orange man going forward. Then after that, obviously, the conviction of my sin. I couldn't sleep at night thinking about the things of God. One night, I couldn't fight it any longer, in my stillness of my room, I surrendered my life to Jesus Christ and I accepted Him as Lord and Saviour of my life. A decision I've never regretted. And married Julie, and have 2 daughters. And there was mistakes made in my life growing up. I've already touched them, but all I could do, Nathan, was all I wanted to be then was a good husband and a good father. And my girls make me very proud. They're fiercely loyal and supportive to me. Even when I get the abuse, I know they were never shielded from what happened to their grandfather. From they were able to crawl. We never silenced the conversation. They were very aware of it, and we always brought them up to respect everyone in the community, but be proud and be you confident in your culture, and don't ever let anyone make you feel ashamed of who and what you are. And they are very confident in who they are. So they make me very proud. So as a family, my family are everything, because I appreciate what I didn't have. Now I do have it, and I'm just it's perfection for me when I'm at home with my wife and 2 daughters.
And that is not amazing to see how God saved you, and He's now let you be the father that you didn't have. And in that sense, and it's obviously your dad was the best father that he could possibly be until what happened. So I suppose victims are always treated as inconvenient, divided, sidelined, and it's uncomfortable, not just for, let's face it, the IRA, Sinn Féin, but just the general political establishment. Why do you think that is?
Back to, I would say, it's like a subliminal move-on mentality. And we are this constant irritation that people want sometimes to go away. I touched upon that previously. There's a small maybe number within the Protestant community who would say, just more liberal-minded people, even people in the church. Do you really need to bring that up? Can you not, is there not more reconciliation could be, can you not engage in that? And we do, of course we do. But and I'm a member of the victims group SAFE, and SAFE have been very good to me over the years. And as an organisation, they are challenging they're very across a lot of sectors.
What does SAFE stand for, just for people that aren't aware?
South East Fermanagh Foundation.
Okay.
It was a victims group that was set up in South East Fermanagh to cater for the needs of people who were murdered, attempted murders and bombings, and the persecution largely of the Protestant people in rural Fermanagh. But the organisation has evolved.
And by the way, just as a side, am I right in saying that in South Fermanagh, East Fermanagh, there was a lot of, like your father, farmers and eldest sons who were shot for no other reason than they were Protestants?
People were driven off the land, okay? And, the IRA sometimes type portray this was a war of nobility, this was a war to fight against imperialism, oppression, but it was a naked raw sectarianism campaign, because these cards dodged across the border, murdered the Protestant man and the farmer or lady, and went back across the border again, the relative safety of the Irish Republic. So the organisation has evolved now, and the organisation has people from both the Protestant and Roman Catholic communities. They have different groups throughout Northern Ireland, so it's not just a Fermanagh group anymore, it's all over Northern Ireland, even though they retain their title. And they've networked with different organisations globally, people who have suffered as a consequence of terrorism in their land, and they've now they've offices in mainland GB and Southern Ireland as well, and they do a lot of work with victims in Southern Ireland, and as I say, some of the safest, most powerful advocates are people from the Roman Catholic community.
Yeah. With that being the case, why does the political establishment not like victims?
Well, I wouldn't say
that would be wrong. I find it a sort of uncomfortable thing to discuss,
because, as I say, we're not prepared to go away, because we need a champion. We need to defend, as I say again, the memory and integrity of our loved ones. And the cornerstone of any democracy is justice and truth. And we can't stop ever demanding that, because it's doing a disservice to our loved ones. Now, for people to counter that and say, but society needs to heal and reconcile, and I agree with that. But as long as you have an organisation like Sinn Féin, Provisional Sinn Féin, who are attempting to distort the narrative of the past, victims will always be here to challenge that. And sometimes politicians, that's uncomfortable for them, because they have to represent us. They are our political voice. And but largely, I have to say now, as a unionist, all three political parties have been so supportive to me. UUP, DUP, TUV, they're all, and anything I ever asked, I get full support. So when I say, we talk about politicians, we also include the British government politicians in that. I'm not necessarily maybe talking about unionist politicians. And I have to say, and it is important that we educate people, we evangelise people maybe not particularly from our camp, if you want to call it, and let them see. And I know SAFE do a lot of positive outreach across the community in terms of education and awareness, and that is imperative going forward.
So I suppose really what you're saying is that, you guys as victims, and victims cover a lot. There's so many different, so I don't want to say all victims are the same, but you as a victim is probably the best way to put that. You as a victim, you're saying your dad's honour is at stake in many respects, and the truth about his killing is being pushed under the carpet, and we're seeing a revisionism that is undermining and is giving a justification for his unjust killing. Therefore, as long as that narrative is being promoted, you guys have to speak out.
We have to speak out, and we will not stop speaking out. It just concerns me a little going forward that, and that's why we have to educate young people, because we don't want young people bound by what happened in the past. We want them to reconcile, as I say, move forward together and make a peaceful and prosperous Northern Ireland. Because let's face it, Northern Ireland today is a very different place than it was 50 years ago. So we all aspire to that. And my own two daughters are doing very well actually. And they're friends with people from across the community. But sometimes I feel, and I think Stephen Nolan did allude to it when he produced his programme Top Table, that he went round, maintained sector schools to get young people to come forward to speak on behalf of the nationalist community. and he could pick young people in abundance. But he went down around the control grammars. He wasn't getting this depth of numbers coming forward. He was finding it very hard. He actually said, I think it's online, he said it, to get young people from the unionist community to come on and articulate the unionist position, or Protestant position, whatever you want to call it, depending on the issues. So that does sadden me. And I think schools have a responsibility as well.
Yeah.
Because within the maintained sector schools, I see much more confidence in Gaelic games, which is a cultural body as well as sporting body. Irish language, Irish dance, history, the narrative of the Troubles. So it's no coincidence that these young people are coming out, with confidence in terms of their identity. And then you look at the school community. And I know schools in Northern Ireland today that if a non-uniform day, if young people come in a non-uniform day, come in a Rangers top.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's divisive. Now I'm sitting here tonight in my Rangers top. And I know that people maybe watch this and say, right away they'll have this prefixed idea that, it's a football team. It's a football team, a very successful football team. Maybe not at the minute, but
they've done better.
Hopefully
10 years ago.
Next year, they'll do it next year. But you understand what I'm saying, and young people are encouraged to wear their GA apparel.
Yeah.
And that's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly legitimate.
It's an expression of their identity.
So young people within our community are actually stifled.
Yeah.
Because there's many teachers out there and people in leadership who don't have the confidence within our community that the nationalists have within their community, if you understand what I mean. So that's a disparity going forward.
That's an interesting observation, and I think part of it, you're right in terms of schools and stuff. I know of schools in loyalist areas and unionist areas that are being encouraged to participate in GA games and Irish language.
Yeah.
But woe betide them if they decided to bring a band in.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And teach them the music traditions, which, by the way, legally is their human right.
Of course. Yeah.
It is their human right that they should be, and actually the whole purpose of state schooling is to actually advance and teach children in the culture in which they're raised.
Yes.
And I think you're right, there is that lack of cultural finesse, but I mean that's just the reality of where we are, unfortunately. Now the question is, though, you as a victim, when you see this from the First Minister of Northern Ireland, and she may not be wearing her First Minister hat, and it may be even just before she became First Minister, but she attends a eulogy to members of the Provisional IRA, or a funeral where there's gunshots fired over the casket, or like Big Bobby, as we've seen.
Yeah.
2020. It was 2022, wasn't it, or something? But during COVID.
Yeah.
What goes through your mind?
Frustration that not enough people are calling that out. Because what saddens me is people are conditioned to think that this behaviour is now normal.
Yeah.
And I did campaign. The MP for Southdown resides in an office named after two dead Provisional IRA terrorists in Castlewellan. But people drive past that as if these two people were the most normal, legitimate soldiers or freedom fighters above the door. Like, that wouldn't happen in any other MP's office. It's like having an MP in Bradford with the name of Bin Laden above the door. It's about outrage. So why do we have to tolerate that in Northern Ireland when no other country in the world would tolerate it? Because people's mindsets are conditioned to think it's normal. And Republicans still propagate this narrative of confidence. They're confident people. And Michelle O'Neill's still come out and she'll still go to these eulogies, she'll still celebrate the activities of the Provisional IRA. But where's the church leaders again? Why will they not call that out? because sometimes I find if there's any misdemeanours from within the unionist community, they're very quick to get on the airwaves. But we need balance, we need equity across the board. If something's wrong, it needs to be called out. And so it is frustrating, and yet again, it causes a lot of hurt. It does, to a lot of people, cause re-traumatism, because when they look at their loved one and they think of their memory and what they went through, and now we have the leader, so-called leader, First Minister of Northern Ireland, celebrating the deeds of people who caused that hurt to that family. How does that aid and heal reconciliation and inclusivity across our community? It doesn't. It actually sets it back.
How do you respond to those who say, and we've got to be clear, not all nationalists agree with this.
Yes.
Right? In fact, we've got to remember that the majority of nationalists, until the ceasefire and until the agreement, did not support Sinn Féin, did not support the IRA. They supported peaceful constitutional nationalism. But how do you respond to those who say it's just part of Republican culture? It's just their history, and they're celebrating they're commemorating their dead.
Yeah. We all remember the horrendous riots in England there a number of years back, and to do with immigration. And there was people tweeted, let's say tweets that would have been not considered to be good for community relations.
Yes.
One particular lady, I think, she's still in jail. She's 30 months sentence she got.
Ex-Tory
councillor.
Ex-councillor, yes. Was she the wife of an ex-Tory?
Wife of an ex-Tory councillor.
Yeah.
So people are outraged, and she served a sentence, a significant sentence for incitement.
Yeah.
Okay. So people were outraged across the spectrum. So if that's so wrong in England, and people take a very dim view of it in England, why is it acceptable for us in Northern Ireland?
Or we see NECAP. And NECAP, as soon as they said, alleged to have said, I want to clarify, alleged to have said that kill your MP.
Yeah.
Well, that was outrageous.
Yes.
But here we are, we have Sinn Féin celebrating people who actually killed their MP.
Exactly. So you see my point, and there's people, I suppose, across the world, it's the same as neo-Nazis. You understand what I mean?
Or Hamas.
Hamas, Hezbollah, all the FARC, all the nut jobs of the world. They're all have been, I think it's an offence in the UK now to shout out support for Hezbollah or Hamas. And but yet in Northern Ireland we still have to tolerate this glorification. It's only when we went out to Rwanda did we see how, a society evolving from conflict or trouble. In Rwanda they've moved further down the road than we have.
Yeah.
And so people can say as they please, but there's a moral and ethical situation here in Northern Ireland, right?
Yeah.
Right is right and wrong is wrong.
Yeah.
And if you took life in Northern Ireland, whether it be a loyalist or a Republican, you murdered your neighbour, that's wrong. And that should not be glorified, no matter how much revisionism, glorification, celebration, eulogising. It's wrong, and it should be called out, and it should be called out right across the spectrum.
You mentioned Rwanda earlier, and there's a focus there on repentance. There's a focus there on restoration, reconciliation, remorse and truth. And you say that's coming from a Christian perspective.
Yes.
Do you think that's what's missing in Northern Ireland? Do you think that a lot of what has been liberal, a liberal way, and when I say liberal, I mean it is, it's founded in sort of secular principles of resolution rather than Christian principles? Do you think that's the problem?
I do think that is a problem. Within society in Rwanda, society was that low. Yeah. They had no way, they couldn't, really and truly, they couldn't get any lower. I remember speaking to a wee girl, and she was a wee curator in a museum. Lovely young lady, and married with expecting a wee baby. And she was found as a 6-month-old baby under her 6 dead brothers and sisters.
Horrendous.
Bodies were lying in the streets, they were lying on the road. 1 million people were murdered in 100 days. You know, we heard some, as I say, some horrific accounts. Rwandan society was so low. And then there's the secular parts of Rwanda, of course, secular too, but there's a strong Christian influence. And the church is very strong out there. And so the churches, you know, the churches seem to have taught this to a certain point, and people have followed the lead of the churches. And I think within Northern Ireland, the church needs to have an honest conversation with victims. They need to listen to victims. And sometimes there's an elitism. When they make policy in the church, say for the Haas talks or any of these initiatives, even broadly, they need to consult victims. They need to consult victims at the cold face. And they need to go geographically around Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the views of rural Ulster is very different than urban, you know, people. But they need to listen. They need to listen to what we have to say. They need to embrace it. It might be an uncomfortable truth. But we're good people. And we want what they want. But our pain is very real. And I'll tell something really saddened me. It was in, I think it was 2015, and there's a Christian youth organisation called Summer Madness, and I found out that some of the parents alerted me to it, that the guest speaker, the big tent of hundreds of young people at young people all come from all over Ireland, and there was different seminars, and the big night at the end was the person who was speaking to these young people about his life was none other than Martin McGuinness. And I was absolutely horrified that those young people were going to be exposed to that particular type of individual, because he was going to bring nothing to their faith. You know, he was going to bring nothing to their Christianity. And so we did challenge them, and we did, thankfully, permitted us in to have a seminar and to give our viewpoint. And I have to say, we were very well received about young people, because we did put forward the cause about repentance. Sometimes these liberal philosophies, it's all about reconciliation, it's all about forgiveness. They're all credible, but the big word in this missing is repentance, contrition, remorse. And as I say again, the focus is sometimes always on the innocent victim. It takes courage to come out and call it out with the perpetrators, or those people who deem to be supportive politically of the organisations that murdered innocent people.
Yeah, I think it's a sort of sub-Christian approach. Now, I think maybe my view on forgiveness might be slightly different, as I sort of hinted earlier.
Yeah.
Because I do think you can forgive without necessarily saying that, because Jesus says, "Remember, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do."
Yeah.
But I don't think you can have reconciliation without repentance, because you're talking about restoration.
Yeah.
What I sense though, Sammy, is that there is. I think you've hit on a very important issue, that there is, at the very foundations of what the peace process was about, it was founded in liberal secular values. And guess what? We still, 25 years on, haven't solved the problem.
No.
Yet we're seeing here in Rwanda Christian values. And let's be clear, the church in Rwanda, no church is perfect, but one thing I admire about that sort of African church is that they do take a lead. They're solid about proclamation and proclamation of the Bible, and they're not willing to compromise their faith. And
the sad part is, during the genocide, there's parts of the church was complicit in the genocide, so they're not squeaky clean.
No.
You know, because we asked, how do people descend into such depravity? And a lot of people say it was propaganda. Propaganda. They listen to. There's no mobile phones or computer. They listen to radios, and there was newsreaders encouraging them to go out and commit acts, and it was a terrible time, and people felt so fired up and fueled up that they were prepared to do that, and that's the dangers of propaganda in Northern Ireland, and the dangers of young people when they sing ooh ah up the rah. You understand what I mean? Because that's continuing this. You know what I mean? Going forward, we still say it's it's just a song or whatever. What's the meaning of the song? What they say? Up the Ra. Well, the Ra was a Republican organisation that murdered innocent people.
Yeah.
And they're singing that. Like, that's a hate crime.
Well, when we see, this is the thing, so when you look at, say, deeply divided societies, when those sorts of things are glorified in song, and when you do have propaganda, and most importantly when you have grievance, and grievance is bred into a people, or bred is probably the wrong word, when it is pushed and indoctrinated is probably the best word. Yeah. Indoctrinated into a people group. What you find is then there is resentment invariably becomes violence.
Yes.
And like, it's concerning to me where this whole grievance culture is coming in Northern Ireland. You've stressed about the need to educate young people on what happened.
Yeah.
What do you think should be done?
I think it should be. I think it should be introduced more into the curriculum within the schools. Okay, but then you risk the danger. It's who's teaching it. If you understand it, people have sympathies to what happened in the past. Well, that they're going to bend. You know what I mean? It's all about interpretation. I think the churches need to be more proactive. The hierarchies of the churches and be more forthright in their condemnation, because any of these things take place now, they're silent. So I think they need to come out, and obviously I think the politicians, they're still the onus upon them, and many of them do still in the assembly call out Sinn Féin and what they're continue to do in Northern Ireland, because you can't, as I say, on one hand promote reconciliation and then on the other hand go back to the people and support the people who brought this country to its knees. And I think, I'm going to be honest, I think people in the home should tell their children and tell their grandchildren about what happened, not for the purposes of indoctrination or to radicalise or to, simply to tell them the truth, so they're not exposed to this malignant narrative about the past. Tell them that the RUC men were good men who served this community, and risked their lives to preserve peace. The UDR soldiers who went out at night, to thwart terrorism, good men. The prison officers who kept these people within the prisons and endured unbelievable harassment, intimidation. And when I think of the British Army young soldiers coming over here, and I think of the resilience of a certain generation of people who couldn't get to work in the morning with bomb scares and town barriers that had to, people adopted, and people didn't bow the knee, and that is to the credit of the people of Northern Ireland. But we need to tell our young people that.
And people, let's face it, the RUC were holding back people who were loyalists, people who were Republican, from killing each other, killing their own, killing everybody else. They locked up people who were on both sides. So it wasn't this idea that it was the state forces, they were launching this war against the innocent Catholic people. I think there's a lot of narratives that are, and I think the word romanticised is the right word. I think you used that at the start, because when you have a romanticised view of history rather than a real view of history, it gives this sense that everything, it gives this sense that something that's not a lie. It gives a lie, and it then misrepresents the vast bulk of the people who were in the security forces who were there to stop the chaos. Weren't they, like,
preserve the peace and stop this community descending into anarchy. Because the credit for the peace process should go to the security forces and to the people of Northern Ireland who did not bow the knee to the threat of violence from terrorism, who kept on a peaceful path. Think about places in Fermanagh. People were being murdered right around that border county, and those people didn't resort to violence. They put their faith and trust in the security forces to preserve their way of life, and we've come out of it now. And but unfortunately, there's a new battle ahead, and we have to face that. We could wrap everything in cotton wool and say everything's okay, but unfortunately, truth is important, and we must be on message in terms of the young people.
Are you seeing any signs of hope, or is society drifting into historical amnesia?
I still think it's drifting into a degree of historical amnesia. Many young people now are moving forward, and they're not that interested in the past. They want to have a good job. They want a good health service. They want a good education. They want a good way of life. They want to be affordable housing. They want to have all the things that any normal democracy should aspire to, and that's good. That's good. But there is room in there for young people from both communities, and the sort of thing does frustrate me a wee bit. Sometimes you can only have all those things if you put your culture and leave all your. It's okay to have different people with different viewpoints. That's okay. You don't have to. You can encourage people to be what they want to be. If they want to be a GF now, if they want to be in a flute band, but as long as there's equity and appreciation.
And respect.
Mutual
respect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because I don't see that. If I post anything about my culture, that's just a barrage of abuse.
Yeah.
And that's so sad. And there's so many young people, bands, and I mentioned, maybe going back myself, with bands, what bands contribute to our society in terms of charity, learning a musical instrument, uniform, confidence, discipline, structure, so many attributes. But the band community don't get the recognition they deserve because if one or two bands step out of line, there's no end of people wanting to condemn, and then that makes the whole band culture toxic, and there's enough people trying to propagate that narrative, then that becomes truth to some people.
Well, it's a bit like Belfast City Council. There is a move to try and remove the flag, only designated days. War on bonfire culture, difficulties for parades, and also the whole issue of flags. We can't have that in your street. But if we have one complaint about any of those things, it's got to go to the Parades Commission, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But if you look on the other side, if you have 15% of the population agree with something, even if 85% disagree, an a language sign has to be put on that street.
That's right.
And I think there is a disparity there. There is not mutual respect in that.
No.
And I think the problem is what that does is it stores up trouble for another day.
And they're using the language as a weapon, which does a great disservice to genuine Irish speakers.
Yes.
Because they're weaponising language that these people love, and and I know a couple of Irish speakers and consider good friends, and it frustrates them too because they can see what's happening.
We've had one on this podcast. I'm sure you probably know who it is.
Yes.
And I think the thing is what we appreciate and we value people's right, people's identity, people's language, but it has to be mutually assured. What would you say to the Orange Order, because that's an organisation you're in, and the Loyalist community? What could they do to improve the cultural, improve their position in culture?
Yeah, well, obviously, I think people will recognise there is a bit of a city-rural divide, in terms of Orangeism, and Orange men in Belfast, the same integrity, pedigree as the Orange men in the country, but sometimes it's the hangers-on in the city that give. That's the only difference, and young people consumed with alcohol, which is not an Orange problem, it's a societal problem. If you go down to any of them big concerts in the Boucher Road or any of those events,
St. Patrick's Day, Halloween,
same thing,
New Year's,
same thing,
Pride, whatever it is.
Yeah, but they don't. It's only, it seems to be our culture. It's as used as a football to be kicked about, and so there's a drink culture out there. But I think the leadership of the Orange Institution is doing a fantastic job. They're promoting different initiatives, and while retaining the historical, aspects of the institution which are so important to many members, because it is an organisation that is as multifaceted as, say, faith, identity, even there's politics people in there. There's so much, and that's okay. That's a good thing. But I think we need to have more education. I think our schools within the control sector need to let the Orange Institution in to sell their message, because they're a key stakeholder in our community and a big part of community. Because you look at the 12th of July in Northern Ireland, hundreds of thousands of people are on the streets. If they're not parading, they're watching and they're supporting. Schools should, articulate their community, represent their community, and sadly, I sometimes don't think that's happening in Northern Ireland in 2025, because back to the point, there's a cultural cowardice in there. We need to shy away. We can't be seen identifying with band culture, orange culture, even though the majority of young people in the school support that and their parents. So I think parents, Orange, need to make further representations and obviously look to get into those.
Well, we're going to come more around to a close now, but what would you say to someone listening who's living with deep pain? Mm-hmm. What would you say to somebody?
What do you mean by deep pain?
I mean, deep emotional pain. Maybe they've lost somebody, mm-hmm. Or what would you say to somebody like that?
Well, I spoke to many people, and I do meet many people who have been through the trauma of terrorism in their life.
Yeah.
And obviously for me, my faith has helped me greatly.
Sure.
As a Christian man, I put my faith and trust in my Lord and my Saviour, and I find that peace which passes all understanding in terms of how I deal with what I encountered. But I know not everybody's from a faith-based perspective, and you do try to empower people to tell their story. Sometimes telling their story can re-traumatise, but sometimes telling your story can be a great healer. Mm. And for me, telling my story is a healing within my own life, mm-hmm. and helps and supports me to know that I'm able to share it. I'm able to get the message of faith out there, but I'm also able to get the message of, yet again, confronting the rewriting of the past, to hear the story of what happened my father. And it is important, I think, too, for those people who have suffered, that they feel confident within themselves, that they get representation within the church community, the Orange community, the political community, and the victims community. Yeah. And I think now, compared to where we were at the time of the Belfast Agreement, there's no victims groups. Victims weren't recognised in 1988. When we needed the groups, maybe more so then, there was nothing there. There was no structures in place.
So this is why it was such a mess then? The agreement really didn't consider?
It didn't consider. Now, out of the agreement, a lot of victims groups, as I say, SAFE was formed on the day of the bomb. And I
didn't know that, by the way.
Yeah.
I was only young when
of course,
the agreement happened.
Yeah.
But that's fascinating.
Yeah. And so, and as an organisation, just one organisation. So a lot of victims groups as well. I can name any number of Northern Ireland do equally good work. SAFE were involved in my daddy's 40th anniversary service. Great support to me. And they've been involved in many other services. And there's workers out there helping, therapy, support. And so all we can do is represent each other, support each other, give each other a voice. Not everybody feels confident to come on the airwaves, not everybody feels confident to challenge in the paper. But sometimes when people do that, then they feel this degree of, of hope and confidence, empowerment again. And that's all we can try and do as a victims group and individuals.
Well, thank you. What do you want people to remember about your father? Not just about how he died, but who he truly was.
Yeah, I want people to remember my father as a good man. Okay, a man who never hurt or offended anyone. A man who was confident in who he was, his politics, his culture, and a man who endeavoured to bring up his wee boy after he had suffered the loss of his mother on his wife, a wife that he never really got, still together all those years, but never lived as man and wife. And I was so sad that after Mum, it was only 3 years. So, and a lot of people will try and demean my father, make derogatory remarks about him. It's up to me to articulate who he was, what he represented, and most important, that he was a good daddy to me, his only child.
Yeah. How can people truly support victims, not just with words, but in action?
In action, tell your children. It's never too late. Tell your grandchildren about what happened. And tell them the truth. Because if you don't tell them, they're susceptible to lies and distortions about what happened. Because if they're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, in another 10 years they'll get to school, they'll get to university. And I fear for the future in terms of what the narrative of the Troubles is going to be. Mm-hmm. When I see what's happening now in 2025, I dread to think what's going to be happening in another 20 years. Mm-hmm. But it's up to parents to tell their children the truth about what happened and what was commonly known as the Northern Ireland Troubles.
So, Sammy, just as we close, first of all, I want to say thank you.
Not a problem, Nathan.
I want to say thank you for your honesty. It's not an easy thing to tell your story, and I know you have told it on many occasions, but even still, it can be, as you say, quite traumatising. So I want to thank you for your honesty. I want to thank you for your insight. I know you've been involved in fighting and lobbying for victims for your whole life, effectively. And I thank you for your honesty regarding culture. Now, is there anything that you would, anything you'd like to plug now, maybe SAFE or anything else you'd like to plug right now, just before we go?
Well, for example, in Ulster Presbyterian Church on the 27th of this month, there's a service at 7:30 in the church. And speaking at that service will be the Reverend Rodney Beacom, a Presbyterian minister from rural Fermanagh. And the Reverend Rodney is a man of great faith, a man who, while a member of the RUC, survived a terrorist attack, a man who's a very proud member of the Orange Institution, and a man who represents victims in a spiritual sense. So that man is coming to share a video that he produced, that he was in himself, and speaking of his life. So that's the type of work we do, because that man represents so many aspects of society. He's a victim, he's a former member of the security forces, he's an Orange man, and he's a Christian man. And that night he will come on to share, and that's all the different component parts of many aspects of Northern Ireland come together. And so that goes on all the time in the Remembrance services, but this is just one.
What date is that?
It's a Tuesday the 27th of this month in Ulster Presbyterian Church at 7:30.
So of May. Okay. Yeah. Well, look, that is really helpful. And if people want to get in touch with SAFE, or they want to get anything, get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
Well, obviously, SAFE have the website, and if they have any questions, any queries, they want to speak, the phone number, I can't think of the phone number offhand.
It'll be on the website.
It's on the website, and call up, speak to any of the workers. Kenny Donaldson, Kenny's always always readily available to speak to anyone, and to speak to myself. There's no issue, but we just have to be there for each other going forward.
Well, thank you so much.
Nathan.
And Sammy, thanks for your courage, your clarity, and your witness to the truth. So until next time, folks, keep advancing Christ's kingdom in every domain and moving forward with truth.